Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Just Jocelyn. I'm so glad that you could join us. My guest is Al Brandano. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
And this first half of the show, we are going to talk about specifically one case that is going to change, I think, an awful lot in New Hampshire. There's actually a lot of cases out there. You've got one, I've got one. We've got all sorts of people filing because they're done with the government. They are done with the people's rights being ignored. They are finished with being told, shut up and sit down, pay your taxes, you have no say, get out of the way. So I'll be able to talk about mine today, which is great, but let's talk about Daniel's case. It's coming up for his oral arguments, and that's on November the 29th at the New Hampshire Supreme Court. Yeah, it's going to be big.
9 a.m.
9 a.m. And he was just on Mike Lindell's show Tuesday night, and Mike promised him all the support he needed, which is fabulous, because all of us have been doing it individually to the best of our ability. Mm-hmm. And now this is going to be nationwide, getting the coverage that it needs. And what is it all, what is it all about essentially? Sorry for the mess on my book. The New Hampshire Constitution. What does it say? What does it mean? This protects your rights and mine.
And if you don't know it, you don't have any, as Dan has so well taught us.
Correct. If you don't know your rights, you don't have any. So you need to know your rights. And it's more than the Second Amendment. And I'm not making fun of that, but that's what everybody says when there's way more. We have 39 enumerated rights in the state of New Hampshire. And we need to know those. The right of, free speech, free religion. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
And actually, we actually have a right of revolution in our Constitution, which is unlike other constitutions. And remember, we were one of the first and second ones, which was an amalgamation of others that 4 stars in 1784. But it's pretty interesting that we have we have to go through all the steps. Of course, I'm not talking about
we're not just jumping right to that. But I think the right of revolution in today's day is filing lawsuits and motions and complaints and bringing it to the attention of all these people that are ignoring it. I feel like this is our first step.
I think for all of us as a society, and especially in New Hampshire, we've been asleep. Mm-hmm. We all work 2 jobs, right? Think about what happened right after the 80s. As soon as the 80s happened, one family member could work, support a family, and kids could go to school and do all those things. Mm-hmm. All that could happen. Then all of a sudden, after the 80s, our dollar gets devaluated. And here we are, 2 people working all the time, trying to make it happen, even now, even pay for food. So we've lost our identity especially the middle class. So we're fighting day and night just to survive. We stopped paying attention to the education system. But we stopped paying attention to our politicians who we thought we voted them in, and that was that party or that party or that party. And we were mistaken because it was one party and nobody was looking after us.
Correct. We thought, with what we had been taught in school, that when you elected this person and they said they were there to represent us, in my wildest imagination, I never expected truly the Democrat Party to treat me like garbage under their feet. Just as I think Democrat people didn't expect the Republican Party to treat them like garbage under their seat, which is what we've been seeing. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward a little bit, now we've got a uniparty, and they don't represent anybody but themselves. But while they're campaigning, give me your money, I want your money. Oh, I hear you, I listen to you, oh, I agree with you. The minute that they, I don't even know if I want to say their oath of office, because we know that's a freaking joke right at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, in New Hampshire, and every politician swears an oath to the New Hampshire Constitution as well as the U.S. Constitution.
Correct.
And they don't know what's in the Constitution. So, I mean, the big challenge for us, they've had a long time. They've been ahead of us for a long time. We are catch up right now, and catch up means the power of one. And most people don't realize that how much power they really have. They just need to stand up. They feel alone. They go up, I'm not smart enough. It can't happen. You can join a group, be part of something, do the littlest things or the biggest things. I think it was Mother Teresa once said, if you could do great things, do great things. If you could do small things, do small ones. So, I mean, the power of one, get involved. There's so many wonderful organizations that are fighting back for our rights.
And I think find your lane, find your avenue. I thought, I can't do this. This is insane. I can't do this. But in listening to you and Daniel and Wayne and all these people, we can do this. You just have to find, where do you fit in? How can you fill in the gap of something that somebody else doesn't have? And I find myself in translator mode, because I'm like, what are you guys? What are you talking about? Say it to me 5 more times. I learn it, and then I can spit it out. But I can say it to other people, and they're like, oh, I get it. And I said, don't worry, I was there and I had to ask them 5 times. And you can't be afraid to ask questions, and you can't be afraid to stand shoulder to shoulder, but definitely don't sit on the couch going, yeah, you go, woo, because that doesn't do anything.
I really believe we're at a critical time, and you have 2 things to offer. You can offer your time or your money. Yeah. If you don't want to offer your time and show up, which is the most precious gift of all, if you don't want to honor it with time, then you need to put some money toward it, and donate to the cause or the people that you think are going to help you. And
not donating to the politicians, because the money's not getting to who you really want or I really want. That's decided by the RNC or the DNC. And not that I want to get deep into politics, but it's just not getting there. At all.
In supporting an individual, like we have this here with Dan Richards. So
correct.
This amazing case, amazing man, right? A veteran, Air Force veteran.
Yes.
Self-studied New Hampshire constitutionalist. Amazing, right? Has educated us for the last 2 years, since 2020, and groups of people have followed him and listened to his lectures, and have been really changed. It changed my life meeting him and studying to understand what my obligation is. Remember, in the Constitution in New Hampshire, it's our duty.
Correct.
To hold our representatives
accountable.
Exactly. To the exact, not just accountable, exact. So I didn't realize that was my duty. And when we write somebody, we say, oh my God, I'm going to write the Secretary of State. I'm going to be afraid they're going to come after me, or somebody's going to come after me. If you don't do it, they're going to come after you anyway. So you might as well do it and stand up for yourself.
Yep. And when people ask, so I did this just last week, I got an email saying HB this and HB that is up for vote Monday.
Yes.
You got to write it right away, Sunday night. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to write? And I thought, how many times have we, oh, please, Mr. So-and-so, I'd really like if you would vote this way because I feel blah, blah, blah. I feel blah, blah, blah. And we believe that if 100 of us or 20 of us or however many would write and say, this is what we want you to do, they would. And we found out that they don't. That they have other obligations and promises that they've made. So I'm sitting there and I went, I'm not going to do that. So wrote to the Executive Council and I said, I am instructing you to vote this way on this and this way on that, and this is why, because you swore an oath. And I went through these 3 paragraphs that we should all be using and say, that is your job to listen to we, the citizens. We elected you, but if you're not going to listen, you're not going to be here very long. You're going to get fired.
I think the biggest challenge for all of us in the general public is frustration, is no accountability, right? So over and over and over again, and that's what Dan is really doing here. I mean, this has been a 3-year battle of which he felt, or sometimes we all felt, it was losing. in the end, it was actually winning. Each one of those skirmishes, each one of those
Is a
legal
win.
skirmishes, we learned something, and everybody learned something, and we were able to position ourselves in a better place and understand the way the law was. But I think for most people right now, the challenge is accountability, right? So no one's held accountable. You know, we live in the state, I call it the live free or die, but no one's held accountable when it comes to election law. I mean, think
Correct.
about it. We have the Secretary of State nor the Department of Justice has really prosecuted how many
Anybody?
people in
1,
20
2?
years?
Yeah.
I don't know, but clearly,
It's very low.
But clearly, there are formal complaints. Lou, Senate District 24, the recount there sent. There was 100, somewhere around 147 violations that was sent to the the Ballot Law Commission, sent to the Department of Justice. There were 2 times in Wyndham,
Correct.
Ken Eyring and Tom Murray, their group, the Integrity Group, they have 2 formal complaints and no
Correct.
response to the Attorney General and the Secretary of State. So people feel frustrated, right? So this is the challenge. We have to change the law. It's up to our legislatures, and this is where I think the big we have failed. Our legislators have failed us because they have not enacted any felony or misdemeanor charges
On anyone.
with any of these violations of voting.
Correct.
There's a big position that says they're really not responsible. The really responsible party is the town itself, because our Constitution says the selectmen, the moderator and the selectmen will sort and count ballots. They're responsible for the machines. They're actually responsible for the maintenance, the security. They don't know that, but they are. And that's through a town bond. So it's really kind of interesting how the Secretary of State has this procedures manual.
Oh, and it's huge.
It kind of sits out there. And if people violate it, there's no, because the legislature, either they're going to change the Constitution so that they hold people accountable, or they're going to do something with election law to hold people accountable.
Correct. Because they're the only
Department
ones.
of Justice really can't do anything. We want to blame them, but really,
it's up to the legislators, because they're the only ones that can change law and make law.
correct. The legislature has failed us.
Absolutely. And the answer is not vote them out, because guess what? More bums get voted in.
But
I mean that in all sincerity.
But I think there needs to be a conscious effort to hold people accountable for this. And if we're going to amend the Constitution of New Hampshire to do that in some form, then the legislators have to have the guts to do that, or change, an RSA or an actual law. But, once again, and I'm not touting the Department of Justice or even the Secretary of State, their hands, if it's not there, they can't do it.
Correct.
So.
But what we're fine. Well, let's talk about Daniels before we go to an November 29th at the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So this is what Daniel contends. He contends that the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, and you can look it up. Just Google it. Section 4, the delegate to the legislature of many states. So that's more than just our state, but not all. It's the duty to establish the time, the manner, and the place for holding federal elections. It's not happening. But this is what he contends, that the U.S. Constitution lays it out, delegates exactly to the legislature what they're supposed to do, but it's not happening. Second, June 2023, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, opined, because Supreme Court does not make law, they opine, they have an opinion on law, Moore versus Harper, which is what he talks about over and over and over again, reinforces Daniel Richards' case. Why? Because Moore versus Harper is now a binding precedent on all election law. Squarely puts it back at the government, back at the legislature, back where it belongs, and saying, hey, this is in your court. We've got this, this, and this. It's now up to you. And you can't push back on us that we have to have this, we have to have that. It's clearly established. You now, the onus is all on you at this point because of the Supreme Court. And then the third thing he alleges is the legislature has repetitively encroached on the voting rights of New Hampshire inhabitants. And I say that for a reason. Well, how did they do that? Altering the mandatory election provision of the New Hampshire state constitution established by who? We the people. That's what his case is about. That's what his oral arguments are going to be on.
Okay, that was a mouthful. So let's really
break it down.
Let's break it down. That's really, really simple.
Yep.
It's a simple case. So Dan was living in Auburn.
Yes.
And he went to have his ballot cast, and he asked to have his ballot hand counted.
Correct.
And we can go over this in depth later, but the state of New Hampshire never took away hand counting. The machines were approved on a trial basis, but it never said why you're doing machines on a trial basis, they won't be hand counted. In fact, most elections in your town, some ballots get hand counted.
Correct.
About 30% of all ballots are hand counted in the state of New Hampshire because the towns are small and they don't need
have a machine. Yeah.
So that was always available to him. On that day, he was not allowed to have his vote.
He was denied.
He was denied his vote. And since then, I'm just going to fast forward, the Secretary of State, I think disingenuously says if a person, a citizen comes before to put his ballot and have it counted in the machine, if they insist to have it hand counted, there is now a side pocket.
There's a little side pocket.
Right.
You
So
put it in.
That was never taken away, and now we have that capability. We've always had the capability.
Right.
We didn't have to get it granted. We just didn't know.
Correct.
We always had that capability. So you can always have your ballot hand counted. And so they denied him. He couldn't get his vote hand counted. So the big part of Daniel's case is he was denied the right to vote.
Correct.
It's unbelievable. The second part that's really inherent to all of us is there were only really two provisions in the absentee ballot that was available, and it started in World War II. The first one was if you were serving overseas and could not be there. And the second one...
You could ask for an absentee ballot. Yeah.
Right, absentee ballot, but remember that had to be signed with an affidavit to say, before me, someone who can hear an oath, right, swear an oath, would say, sitting before me, town clerk or military officer or whoever it is, I witness that this is who they say they are.
And they had to notarize it.
It had to be notarized.
You just didn't sit, in the latrine over in wherever and go, this is my name, put it in the envelope and send it, which is what's happening right now. But
and the other one was a disability, right? You were disabled.
Right, and you had to have a note from the doctor.
Absolutely.
And again, you still had to have it, a properly executed affidavit. I mean, okay, yeah, just sign here, Al, that's me.
Well,
and I'm going to take this to the court, I'm not going to have it notarized. It wouldn't fly in court, so why is it flying with voting ballots?
Anyway, so a lot of things happen between now and then, and here's where Dan's case gets even more interesting. So in the same period of time, he realizes that the absentee ballots, because of COVID, the state, Governor Sununu and legislature decided that we're going to add other things to this. So
other reasons to get an absentee ballot.
Outside the Constitution, they chose to do this on their own. This is where the Bruin case comes in and all the others, which we'll talk about in a second. But so now all of a sudden, Dan's situation is, wait a minute, you added, and I'm not kidding, there could be bad weather. I don't have a babysitter. I'm paraphrasing it, but these are the incidental things that they added.
I'm afraid of COVID.
Afraid of whatever.
That was in there. I read that last night. But what happens is, as they added it, it squeezed out the...
It squeezed out. There was a line that said, I need you to sign, and had to be an affidavit, a sworn affidavit.
Right, and you also had to check the box. Well, originally you had to check... The original two, you had to check the box.
But some people believe by adding them, they maybe inadvertently came, the witness signature and the whole thing were no longer available. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying it's really so if you look at your envelope now, there is no place for the signature. Right. There's no box either.
So it's not an affidavit and there's no place for a notary.
Exactly. So the question in Dan's case is that allowed people to vote that didn't have a properly written affidavit, and that's a violation of our Constitution. It's
Right.
a violation of our state's rights, and to hold people accountable.
But isn't that also so when anybody goes to vote in person, you have to show an ID, they check you off the list.
I don't think you have. Well, that's another story, but
But to me, somebody can request an absentee ballot. They can fill it in their, bedroom, whatever. They put it in the
you could do
envelope.
it online. Now you could do it. You could be online. You could just do it.
So
online.
there's absolutely no way to prove that person is who they say they are.
They're saying they are, but there's no one who witnesses. You didn't have to show up at your town office and say you live at, or if you're in college, you're at this dorm, and here's your thing, and I'll sign it off. And
Yep.
And the other.
Well, isn't that discrimination of some point as well?
Well, it's not equal rights. So when you're voting, right, you need equal rights. So
Correct.
think about this for a minute. A college student can have a ID for 5 years. It doesn't have to be in college, as long as it's a valid 5-year ID that they are at that college or went to that college, they can vote in New Hampshire. So you and me show up, what do we say? Do you have your tax bill? Do you have this? But if you're a student, you're treated differently. So this is another issue in Dan's case. I think the most important thing that's really happened that I believe will help Dan is Bruin and Keller, both of those cases between the Supreme Court. And both of those, in the end, one was a voting rights case, another one was a guns rights, Second Amendment. But in both cases, I think the key was you have to go back to the original intent of the language in the Constitution, unless it was amended. So when the legislature creates law and they don't follow the Constitution, it's
It's
done
repugnant to the Constitution.
So they have to go back.
Yep.
So I think this is where Dan has a really strong place here, because it's really one of the most important cases. And even as Mike Lindell and the rest of the people on his show identified, this is a national case that's gotten no publicity.
Yep.
New Hampshire has shut this down.
Oh, absolutely.
All the press has shut this down. This is the
There hasn't been a word on it.
Biggest case, I think, coming in voting rights in a very long time.
Right, and overdue, definitely overdue.
And done by a gentleman who is not a lawyer.
Correct.
And it's
Pro
what
se.
they say, pro se.
Yep, and there's nothing wrong with that, because at this point, who can afford a lawyer? And gee, let's look at the list of lawyers that are constitutional lawyers. There's not very many of them, so we might as well do it ourselves, because the Constitution says we can.
Right.
And we are following the Constitution, and we have the right of redress of grievance. And just because things fall out of favor doesn't mean you have to walk away.
Well, that's another way, in New Hampshire Constitution, we have a thing called a remonstrance. And it's really funny because, unfortunately, in Dan's case, a case prior to this, Dan served the legislature, and the remonstrance is when you don't get, when you're not heard, as a citizen's not heard by his legislature or his elected officials, he has a right to remonstrance.
Right.
And the Supreme Court in New Hampshire ruled that the remonstrance is out of favor. It's fallen out of favor. I don't know how your rights in the Constitution can be, but that was their ruling. The interesting part is, I think maybe Dan goes back and revisits that with Bruin and Keller decisions.
I love it.
And that changes everything.
Oh my goodness.
So that's another.
It is. That's another show.
Yeah.
We've had so many. So if you're interested, follow Daniel Richard and his case against New Hampshire. And it's on November 29th at the New Hampshire Supreme Court up in Concord.
9 a.m. And we want as many people to show up as support. Yeah. If we fill it up, they have an overflow room. They'll have it on video. It would be fabulous to know that people support this man who's handled this.
He's fighting for all of us.
All of us, and this financial burden has been his.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you file, it's thousands of dollars in fees.
And his time.
And then add to that the time and what he's done. And he's doing it for us. He is following the Constitution and making sure that our rights.
I think it's safe to say he's teaching us to fish and not giving us to fish, right?
Exactly.
So we're learning.
We're learning. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's so good to have you here.
Always.
So we will see you next time, part 2. Have a great night.